Yeah, you guys ready to get started? It's a little bit longer. So, before we segue to litigation a bit, I wanted to talk about risk and safety. Has everybody heard about our SDM tool, structured decision making? No? It's a computer program we use to help us kind of organize our investigation to make decisions. And a big thing is the difference between risk and safety. Anybody want to make a stab at the difference between risk and safety? It's really just common sense. It's not some fancy definition, so it's okay. No? Oh, yeah? Oh, yes, brave one.
I was going to say that risk is maybe more future-oriented and safety more present.
Oh my gosh, A+. Yeah, that's right. So safety is right now. What is the safety threat right now? Risk is future, which that's where I said it kind of makes sense. So in our penal codes, we're assessing safety. So what happened right now? You know, did the child mark a bruise? Was the child sexually abused? Right now. Our Welfare and Institution Code, our WIC code, takes risk into consideration, meaning that the child can be at risk of, let me see what I have in here for you guys. So I have an example of an A. Oh, this isn't really an example. This is where you would write your allegations. So, but you'll see the verbiage on this. The child has suffered, or there is substantial risk that the child will suffer. So risk is what we're focusing on. That is enough to potentially write an allegation and have a court case. Again, that doesn't mean removal. That could be a court family maintenance case, meaning court's going to oversee the child while staying children with the parents. But risk is what I want you to focus on. That is enough. And they're two different things. Safety now, risk future. Kind of an easy example is when we're doing this risk tool in SDM, it asks us about prior involvement or prior referrals with the family. So depending on that number, that risk meter goes higher and higher. So 5 referrals, 10 prior referrals, 50 prior referrals. So it goes from low, moderate, high, very high. Because if the family has 50 prior referrals, maybe there's something going on there. Maybe not, but probably. So it gives us a risk score. Make sense? Yeah, nothing crazy. So that's the difference between risk and safety. Okay, litigation. So one of probably the most interesting pieces of my job, like I said, obviously I'm a social worker. I'm not an attorney. I kind of, attorney stuff's kind of interesting. It's kind of overwhelming also. So it's been a learning curve in the last 2 years. I'm learning all this. So when I say litigation, I mean litigation against the department, meaning the department, which is under the umbrella of the county, is being sued. It happens all the time. Sadly, that's why I have a whole job. The most common thing that results into a lawsuit is abuse in care, like I touched on. Does everybody know what I mean when I say abuse in care?
Like the home you put them into or transfer them into?
Yep, so abuse in foster care. So meaning children being abused in foster care by the foster parent, by the relative caregiver, by the NEFRM, the non-related extended family member. Which again, that's something that should give you a stomach ache because it's really awful. We're going to skip Appendix B for right this second. So I kind of cut you out this little chart. This is data from the Berkeley website. Has anybody looked at the Berkeley website? Well, this is a tool that you guys have. It's open access. You can pull it up all right now. Child welfare data, Berkeley. It's going to give you a whole web page, and you can pull all sorts of data. And it's all pulled from our child welfare system, our CWS DMS system, which is a statewide database. So I'm not awful at math. I don't like when people say social workers don't know how to do math. But the numbers that are used here are nuts. But basically, in the number in the far right column, the state wants us to be under 8.5. You can see San Bernardino's a little high. This is for 2018. There's also some small counties that are high. You know, I think they have like 5 people in the, they have probably 5 kids in foster care. 2 of them get hurt. It's, the end of the world. I think Riverside's a little bit, I always kind of compare us to the counties around us. So Riverside's a little bit lower than us. I think LA is higher than us. We as a state are on a downward trend, which is good because we don't want kids to get abused in foster care, right? Yeah, exactly. We don't like that. But there's more. There's lots of other data on this in the Berkeley website. So you'll see it's maltreatment and foster care. So as a state, we're at 7.5. So the state's good. But, Amador County, I don't know what's going on there. No, I'm just kidding. They probably have like 10 people.
MODOK is like outrageous.
Which one is it?
MODOK, 33.
Oh, yeah. I mean, geez. But their N is 2. I mean, interesting. It's just kind of interesting. If the missing at the bottom, that means somebody needs to do some data cleanup, messy data. Have you guys had a research class? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you know all about all that. Nightmare, you're like, don't stop stressing us out with numbers. But I wanted you guys this is essentially abuse in foster care, what you're looking at. It's also called S1. I commonly refer to it as that. Before I move on too far with that, I do want to get to the mandated reporter. So I gave you the mandated reporter. This is from our handbook also, but this is also from the penal code. It's very interesting, the list of people that are mandated reporters. Especially, I think the interesting one is, I think this is kind of old school though. Film people. Does anybody remember when we used to get film developed? Maybe me and Akila. So in the olden days, there was cameras with film, and then you had to take the film out, put it in this weird envelope, and then you take it to Walmart, and they develop it, and there's a big machine, and they spit out the pictures. So those people are mandated reporters. Everybody knew that? Okay. You know why?
Because they have the evidence, right?
The pictures, some weirdos go and develop their, pictures of kids and gross stuff. So interesting though, right? That's weird. Everyone else on there makes a lot of sense. So, but right now this is where I'm going with this long story. So we do have a lawsuit right now that involves mandated reporter. So very similar to something Michael and I were just talking about. So 2 brothers, they get adopted. Their case closes. Success, right? That's what we want. That's the ultimate goal of the department. And probably about a month later, social worker gets a call about 8 o'clock at night at her desk. She should have gone home hours ago. But she answers her phone, and we'll call her adoptive mom, says, I don't remember, I'm not going to tell you the kids' names anyways, but one boy is being violent to the other boy. But I already called the police, and we're creating a safety plan, and I think we're going to be able to take care of it. So social worker, okay, great, hangs up the phone. So let's put an asterisk by that part of the story. So then probably another month, 6 weeks goes by, and I think IR comes in. I think you know this case.
I know this guy. I'm like,
Don't
Yeah.
give too many details, Nikita. And our boy A has sexually perpetrated on on the other, so brother on brother. And adopted parents are, I want them out. I can't take these behaviors. I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't know these kids had these type of behaviors. You guys didn't tell me this, which creates the lawsuit because they feel like the department bamboozled them, which I won't really get into all that. So both kids are removed. I will tell you, our victim child ended up going back home with the adoptive parents. And that case closed, and hopefully they're gonna live as a happy trio. But they don't want, I know.
In a few years, they're
No,
gonna call
I know.
Behaviors start.
Oh, with that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's even more significant than that, because our other child, our perpetrating child, they don't want nothing to do with. So that's going to come with a lot of issues. You know, wasn't able to reunify with his bio parents, just got abandoned by his adoptive parents, and is ultimately going to be disconnected from his bio brother, which I think could be even the worst, the worst thing about it. So he's in a group home. But the mandated reporter piece, so the piece on this litigation that's going to be, is when the social worker took that phone call, she didn't do anything. Shook her head, oh, okay, they created a safety plan, good job. What should have been done? Yep, call the hotline, right? Easiest thing. Even if the hotline EVOs it, which means evaluates it out, says, no, we don't need to investigate that, they're going to assign, let's say they don't evaluate it out. They're going to assign it to a social worker. Social worker's going to go look what was going on. So then you can say, it was 8 o'clock. But once you pick up that phone, you're not working. Yeah.
Was she supposed to get more information about it when she answered the phone?
I'm not sure of all the information. She probably had more of a conversation than I'm alluding to. I'm just kind of generalizing it.
Because I feel like if she knew, like, what led the parent calling in and, like, wanting to report something, that seems like something significant that you would do a report for right then and there. That's why
absolutely.
I was wondering if she even asked, like, what happened, and is she allowed to?
Oh, yeah, because they're calling. She's a mandated reporter. They're calling her because she, was their adoption worker. There's a connection there. And you'll notice, I'll talk a little bit about it in a while, but especially back-end workers, carriers, adoption workers, they develop these really tight-knit, I'll call it a relationship with their client. You're working very closely. Working towards finalization of an adoption, that's an amazing event. So that parent is really looking to the social worker as an expert, as a support, like, this crisis is going on in my house. I don't know what to do. But once you answer that phone, you're working, whether you didn't want to be working or not. Of course, there was an option to not work. But it comes into this, I think, ethical dilemma. So you have the mandated reporter law per penal code. But it's always an interesting conversation, and probably 100 people have asked me, am I a mandated reporter when we're not at work? So what's the answer?
Yes.
No.
The peer report.
But ethically,
yes.
yes. And I think that's oh, yes, please.
So the adoptive mother called and said, I already contacted the police. We're working on a safety plan. So do you think maybe that was the reason she didn't feel the need to report, because the police were already brought into it? Wouldn't the police have to make a report too?
They should.
They're not meant.
Yep. Yeah, they're mandated reporters. But as county CFS manager, I try and stay in my lane because I can point the finger at what everybody else didn't do. The bottom line is my social workers. But absolutely, cops are mandated reporters also. And they didn't either. But they're not named in the litigation, we are.
But it was still her job to.
Yeah, once she's put on notice, and that's going to be a part, I mean, this litigation is ongoing. It's like right now, it will take a million years because litigation's slow. And that is something that we will argue and battle out and honestly may lose. But from the social work perspective, yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, she just answered her phone. It was 8 o'clock at night. You know, she's probably working overtime, trying to do some report that was due. Who knows? Tired, emotionally exhausted, and made a bad judgment call. But litigation is where it gets scary, you know, and that's where I talk about as long as, you know, you're being honest and ethical, hopefully everything else we can handle. But, you know, it's been rough. Social workers, you guys can imagine, we don't want to be named in litigation. We don't like that. We came into this field to help people. But the world that we live in is very litigious. I mean, I tape Judge Judy every day. I love watching that. We like that. And people sue each other. There are, you know, so many attorneys on TV. It's awful. It's the world we live in. Everybody's trying to get a payday. Yes.
Maybe my brain's just not on right now.
Yeah.
But, okay, so sorry for this dumb question. If it's two children fighting, is she reporting child abuse or is she reporting like harm to others? What is she reporting?
Well, I think the fight was like the older boy like had a knife. Like it was a pretty serious altercation that was going on.
Okay.
So yes, it would have been, honestly, the allegation might even have been neglect by the parents. That might have been like, what's going on in the household? How did he get a knife? It's something that a social worker has to investigate.
Like any information she received on.
Yep. And this is the thing. You just call it into the hotline with what you have. And then a different social worker, it wouldn't have been her, would have been tasked with going and getting the details.
Okay.
And maybe we would have found out about that sexual abuse thing then. Hard to say. But it's just a really big component in this case. And it's just stinky. Yes.
I think that's where I get confused too, because I had two supervisors that had different opinions on like when are you a mandated reporter and when aren't you. Because one would tell me like, well, you're studying to be a social worker, like you're always a mandated reporter. But there was another, like the other one was very much like, no, like you're not working. If you're not clocked in, you're not working. You're not working in your like field of like your scope of practice or field of competency. Because let's say you clock out, but you go to another job that's not social work, and someone reports something to you. It's like unless you're specifically a mandated reporter there, like you should have to report. But it's like ethically,
Yeah.
if someone, especially if they're gonna review your license later and they find out like, oh, you had this happen.
Yeah, it's an ethical dilemma. So the law says while you're doing your mandated duties, so, you know, in your scope of work. In this case, she was still working at 8 o'clock, whatever she was doing on. But, you know, personally, and this is me, you guys get to make the judgment for yourself. I feel like I'm always a mandated reporter. You know, I get a little crazy when, you know, people are trying to beat up their kid in the store, you know, and you feel a certain way. What's going on over there? But to me, yeah, I'm not working. I don't have to call the hotline. But it's an ethical standpoint, and this is exactly what this whole class and this discussion's about. The law says this, but your ethics are something else. And you know, how are you going to do that? Now, as long as you're always calling in your referrals while you're working, you're covering yourself. But what you do off work, you know, it's that ethical position you get to take. But I'm in a similar mind frame, I think, as you, that I'm always a mandated reporter. And I will call 911 on anything I need to. Which drives my husband nuts. Yeah.
So in the materials that I had to go through with Calvin Law and Ethics, and then some of the texts that we're using in my students and the ones that I'm not using my reading, they talk about emotional abuse and DV being a gray area. So
Mm.
what is your perspective on
It is
that?
very gray.
Like
um,
if you have to report it or not.
Oh, I mean, I would report it.
You just report it.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
but I'm conservative. I guess it depends on the extent of DV. But, you know, before I bought our house that we live in, I lived in an apartment. You know, it's much easier to overhear stuff that's going on. People screaming at each other, and I know, and you know, it's loud, it sounds violent, and I know there's a little one next door. Yeah, I'm calling 911. You know, because I've seen what it can do. I've seen kids get really hurt in the midst of a DV. Emotional abuse. So if I'm overhearing like a parent call a child some really disparaging marks, yeah, I would call it in. But I'm conservative on those things, and I know that a social worker is going to go investigate it. You only need this much information to call it in. It could be untrue. Maybe they were moving next door and the kid was crying. I don't know, but that's not my job to do the investigation. It's just to call it in. And your burden is so little to call something in.
And the other piece is I want to see what your like professional opinion is. So legally we're mandated reporters. So the BBS suggests ethically that we process the report with the client. And so I want to know what you think about that, because I can see it making problems.
So the report, when you tell them, you know, I'm going to be making a report.
Yeah.
I think it's fine. I think it depends on the client, of course. I think you have to assess your client's hostility. Like, are you going to put yourself in a potentially dangerous situation? If it's that, yeah, maybe that's not the one. But if there's social workers have such a great toolbox and way of communicating really some crazy things to our clients and a way of getting their buy-in. And if you're able to do that finesse, absolutely. But if you feel that you're going to be a danger, I mean, I of course not. No, yourself is most important. So I guess it just depends on the client. I remember having to tell a dad who was in prison. He was part of West Side Verdugo, which is an old gang in San Bernardino, and he was a shot caller. So he had all these hits on cops. So he was a little scary to me. But his child's mother had physically abused their twins. And I knew it wasn't him because he was in jail. And, I was scared to tell him. Of course, I was going to tell him. But I didn't think he was going to get mad at me. But he was a scary dude. And she ended up getting arrested. And he ended up putting a hit on her in jail. And I asked for her to be in protective custody, but cops didn't do that. But, I mean, that's kind of telling, of course I'm going to tell my client, but it was some difficult news to tell to a client. But yeah, the ethical thing is if you can tell them, that's not putting yourself at risk. Kind of interesting.
Do you think it impacts for the social worker? So like at Riverside, the other campus, I was touching on it briefly, and so the people that were in CFS or CPS there, they were like, that is horrible, because then they tell the kid what to say. And they, so then it creates like an issue for the work. So
are we discussing like kids that are already in foster care and then calling in a referral maybe against the foster parent?
It would be, because I briefly went over with them in terms of the ethical component of reporting is the BBS suggests that we process.
Yeah.
And so then they brought, one of the students brought
they're going to be coached.
Point, and I'm like, that's true.
Yeah.
So I just want to know what you thought, because you have a lot of experience.
I think the social worker can do some, especially an experienced social worker, and with the help of the CAC forensic interviewers if needed, you can assess whether a child's been coached. I don't want to say it's obvious, but you're like, yeah, this child's been told what to say. Now, regarding a child in foster care, and we'll kind of skip to that. There's an ACL, which is an all counties letter. It looks like this. It has a lot of words on it. You don't have to read it all. But it talks about how we needed to create, as a state, we had to do this, create a unit to investigate those allegations of abuse in foster care. And part of that, so I guess my point to the question, Michael, is that a different social worker would be investigating it. So yeah, the child would be coached, but you have fresh new eyes on it. And two, to kind of weed out some of that bias and ethical dilemmas that carriers and adoption workers sometimes have with their clients. Like I said, they get really invested and attached, and they've been working with this family for so long and these foster parents for so long. It's sometimes hard for them to recognize, and we've seen this, that the foster parent's the one actually abusing the child. And that's where this ACL came, which tells us that we need to do business differently. So I think we call it open case investigations, our new unit. Riverside, I think it's OHI. I don't know what theirs stands for, but something that's similar. And basically you have, if there's a kid in foster care and there's a concern of abuse or neglect, this third-party unit, OCI, goes and does the investigation. So that meets the ACL and gives us a fresh perspective to kind of minimize those ethical dilemmas. Because in a lot of litigation, what I see, especially pre-OCI, we have a case where foster mom, she was getting ready to adopt these two little girls, and the adoption worker, the kids ended up with some injuries, like an abrasion on the face. It looked like a rug burn to me. And then bruising on the legs, looked like grab marks and like a slap mark. And these are little girls, like 2 and 4, developmentally delayed. So our 4-year-old's not verbal, can't say what happened. But to me, after all these years, obvious physical abuse. Our adoption worker was kind of shocked when I said that. What? You think it's physical abuse? Yeah, hello. So the kids ended up being removed. They ended up going and seeing our Loma Linda docs, Dr. Young, and both kids had broken rib fractures. That's not a common thing. So it was obvious abuse. Ended up becoming a lawsuit because kids were abused in foster care. But when I review all the case in preparation for litigation, we had a great social worker who was out there just about every month. And every month she documented how those kids had marks and bruises. So great documentation, but we missed calling in the referrals and your face, I know, that's my face all day, just like that. But maybe it was a little too connected with the foster parent and then the foster parent's excuses, because the excuses are crazy. So if you ever get to come to CAC and come to an MDT and hear about a story, if you sit there long enough, I mean like a year, you hear the same stories. Kid falls, kid's clumsy, kids hit each other. Like, they love to say that, and you'll have like a baby with a broken everything. Oh, the 2-year-old did it. I'll just tell you now, the doctor's going to say that the 2-year-old could not break the baby. The kid fell on a toy. You know, the kid's like black and blue. The kid didn't fall on a toy.
Or they have finger marks, but it's a toy.
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
like fingers.
Yeah. But I will tell you, when I first started CFS, I think I was 26. I haven't had children. Man, sometimes I would be like, could that happen? Because I don't quite know. What size should a kid be? What do kids eat? What's this rice formula? I don't know. You know, you're going to have to ask, you know, if you're like me, you're going to have to ask somebody because you don't always know. Now, 15 years later, I know all these things, as Dr. Young has educated me fully. So I know a bullcrap story when I hear one. But again, we're going to, as social workers, we want to believe this foster parent. They're getting ready to adopt these kids. She's not going to be abusing these kids. Oh, yes, she is, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just cut to it now. And that's what was going on in this case. She never disclosed. We never got, the true story from her, which is very common in abuse and care. You also will hardly see these people arrested, foster parents, which is another thing that drives me nuts. But again, I try and stay in the CFS lane. Yes? I have no idea. My hypothesis is there's always usually other adults in the home. So anytime there's multiple adults in the home, it makes the cop's case very difficult to try and isolate the perpetrator. I've even had ones where they do say, I'm the only one that's providing care for the child, and they have to think it through to the DA level of, can I prove this case to a jury? And I get that, because our burden of proof is much lower. It's easy for us to prove a case in juvenile court. In criminal court, it's much harder. It's still frustrating, though, because it makes us so much happier when somebody gets arrested. We just feel better. It's a little bit of justice. What else was I going to say about this? Does someone have a question? No? Okay. So all of the data, those all could potentially be lawsuits, which is kind of scary. We don't have that many. But the most common lawsuit is abuse in care. Everything. We have a current one that I just ran here from will kind of lead into child death. Sorry, guys. That I just came from where we had, I actually interviewed the mom. So I was an intake supervisor, and a mom and her boyfriend comes in. I'll just tell you right now, boyfriends are always a red flag. Everybody will tell you that. Sorry if you're a boyfriend. Boyfriends are just red flags. So mom and a boyfriend come in. They're trying to talk to their social worker, intake worker, because there's a referral. And they tell me, I interview them. I'm a social worker. I can do this. And they tell me how they tape up one of the children because she's so rambunctious. So they just duct tape her to the high chair. And I'm like, because that's where you do your good face, but you're writing it all down. And I'm just like, oh my God, these people are so crazy. So the kids aren't with them. Otherwise, I probably would have called county council and been like, do I have exigency to remove these children? I feel like I do. Go in the back to safety, run, little ones. But they had hid them somewhere. So my I'm like, social worker, get back to the office, go find these kids, write a warrant, detain these kids. So we detain them. And the two little girls, they have two different dads. And mom's just, she thinks taping her kids up is okay. So she doesn't do real well in services. So kids end up going home to their dads, Dad A and Dad B. So I think she's the younger one, we're kind of working towards family maintenance with him. And he doesn't have a relationship with his daughter, so we're working on that. And he's real cooperative. He does his services. He comes and visits her from out of state, which is like amazing. This is looking so great. And we eventually send her there for a trial visit. That goes great. And we close the case. And he murders her 6 months later. Yeah. Pretty violently. He's like a mechanic, and part of it's caught on tape. So it's a lot of blunt force trauma. And she gets life flighted back to Loma Linda. They were just very closely out of state. And I think she ended up passing away here. Okay, the crazy story is the dog ran into her. They have a Labrador, and he ran into her. Okay, no, that's not a story. That's not a thing. Give me a break. You don't even need a doctor to tell you that, but we get there. He's in jail. That's the good news. But the lawsuit is about that we should never send her there. CFS should never send her there. So we'll see what comes out with that one. But again, the social worker, she's devastated. That's not a choice. She thought she was making the best choice, just similar to the choice that I made, the story I told. It's never our intention. But again, me, in my role, in my assignment here, I have the benefit of looking backward at things, saying shoulda, woulda, coulda. But I always try and stay grounded about how difficult the job is. The job's difficult. So it's very easy for me to go back and read it and I'm like, red flag, red flag, red flag. But I know when you're in it, it's hard. And you're trying to do the best thing. You're like, mom's a mess. I'm sending this baby home to dad. He's coming. He's doing visits. Who would have ever guessed, he's going to violently murder his daughter?
Did he have criminal history?
A little bit of criminal history.
Connected to that?
Domestic violence.
Oh.
Talking about the grayness of domestic violence. Yeah, the red flags were, and again, take this with, me looking at it after the fact. Is there's criminal history here. There's some concerns regarding from the out of state. He has guns. He's not willing to disclose where the guns are. His ex-girlfriend, who he was living with, calls a social worker and says there's some concerns. At court one day, so juvenile dependency court, he yanks her arm, the little girl's arm. That just sounds like a lot right there. You're like, what was that crazy social worker thinking? But you put it all together in the midst of things, and your decision making can be difficult. There were a few more red flags. He ended up kind of hooking up with the babysitter, who we were considering part of the safety network. But then all of a sudden, she became his girlfriend. Like I said, the domestic violence here. And a little bit of a rushed case. That's in my opinion. It looked like we kind of hurried and sent little baby girl there. And I have to look at these things from the lens of litigation, of what they're going to hammer us on, so our attorneys can prep for that and, attempt to defend it. I think that the interesting thing is the mom is the one that's suing us, the same mom that taped up her kid. But nevertheless, the child shouldn't have passed away. It's just awful. That's a pretty extreme case, but I don't want you to think it doesn't happen. Child homicide. There's been a lot this year. I think the case that disgusts me the most is the Corona little boy, that 8-year-old that's still missing but presumed to be dead. You guys all know that case? No? So it's an 8-year-old out of Corona missing, but they presume him to be dead. Mom didn't call law enforcement until she wasn't able to make contact with him, I think, for 2 weeks. He was with his dad. So once that happened, law enforcement, and I think the FBI got involved, and then they have found, it's really awful, blender parts, Drano, and a lot of stuff disposed of, so maybe they'll never find his little body. So sad. And then the grandpa's on the news. Has anybody seen the grandpa on the news? Oh, make you cry. So he says, he just wants to find his grandson's body so he can grieve, of course. And he blames his daughter. And he blames CFS, not us, Riverside. But I thought it was a lot for him to say he blamed his daughter, because you don't always hear that. So it's just, I don't know, for that case just makes me sick, and I do this all day long. I'm like, God, what is... So the dad they actually arrested, and he's in jail for murder. At first it was just willful cruelty. Mom went to jail also. I think she might have bailed out. But, what is wrong with these people? It's just gross. So, you see why we're going to end with self-care, right? Any questions? You're like, when are you going to stop?
Can I just say something
Yeah.
real quick, because I think CFS gets a super bad rap.
Yeah, please.
The thing
Do
is,
some
like,
PR for us.
The woman that,
Bless you.
And the child that got killed by the guy out of state. Like the reality is when you're reunifying kids with parents that have abused them, like it starts to shift what you don't think it's okay, but you see a lot of stuff. So
Yeah.
a guy hooking up with his babysitter is not going to she's going to get murdered because you know that you got like a million cases that they're doing a lot more than that.
It's a huge leap to go to that.
And so it's hard, like even though that stuff sounds really bad,
Yeah.
you have to think in the context of you're exposed. Your version of abnormal is very different.
Or reality.
Reality,
You know?
and like you see kids going back with a parent that you really don't think that
Yeah.
they said the right thing to the therapist and they did the services. You know they're not protected.
Yeah.
And so it does make it like I feel like sometimes media and stuff. It's like how could you do that? But it's like you don't know what we're doing and what we see, and the limitations that come with that.
Absolutely.
Because they act like the social workers are just like ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, there probably is some that are, but most
Yeah.
of them are very well.
We're doing our best.
Yeah, they're not like, oh, I gotta get my nails done, like it's gonna die or something. That's what they make it sound like.
Yeah. It's awful. And to build on that, when I was getting my MPA, we talked a lot about government transparency. And I forget, it was all county cohorts. Everybody worked county jobs. And the reality is the public cannot handle full transparency of child welfare. If they knew what I know, what Nikila's seen, what Michael's seen, it would be it might be, maybe they'd give us more money and more services, but a raise. But it's, it really shatters your normalcy because, to deal with these extreme things every day, it does make us a little jaded.
You can't talk about what you do at parties.
Oh God, I'm
The
like
first time
the
people are just
downer.
And then you're like, oops. Okay.
Especially when I talk about now, I'm like, oh, I monitor the child deaths in San Bernardino County. And they're like, what? We're done? I'm so fun. But it's not fun. So the kind of ending, depending on what you guys have questions about, is something I'm kind of dealing with right now. So once a month, I go to this wonderful meeting called Child Death Review Team. And it's a multidisciplinary team meeting. I represent CFS. Public health is there, the coroner is there, who has a worse job than us, definitely. School district's there, law enforcement's there, DA, AMR, the ambulance company. Like Loma Linda ER is there. I think there might be somebody from DVH and maybe the BMC. So huge, really nice network. And we discuss all the child deaths that have occurred. We're in like a 2-month backlog. So that will be homicides, but that will be co-sleeping. It will be traffic accidents, suicide. Suicide was big last year. It makes me so sad. Any kind of child death that you can... runovers. There was a lot of kids that were ran over in the driveway last year, which was weird, I think. A variety. Obviously, all those aren't CFS cases. The goal of Child Death Review is to come up with, co-sleeping is probably the best one. Do we need to do more education on co-sleeping? When we had these runovers, someone reached out to the DMV. Go ahead. Co-sleeping is when you're sleeping with your brand new baby, like nuzzling up, not putting them in the bassinet or the crib. And then a death occurs. So rolling over. Yeah, I know. Which there's lots of people that'll tell you, I co-slept with my baby. I remember I had a manager tell me that. The hospital and public health does not encourage co-sleeping because there are so many child deaths. And it's really sad, especially because sometimes some of the factors are parents being on drugs, you know, but sometimes it's a total innocent death. A mom is exhausted, tired, she's breastfeeding, she falls asleep, rolls over. Oh, it's so tragic. It's really, really makes your heart break. Sounds like a fun meeting, right? Like that. Oh, God. You just want to, like, go home and self-care after that. So we discuss all these things to create what can we do to minimize these things that are going on in our county. So like I said, when there was all these runovers, you know, we talked about teaming with DMV. Does there need to be some education? But you can imagine that's hard. This is definitely macro practice. How do we get policies, advertisement, PR, what needs to happen to try and minimize these child deaths? So there was one I was going to talk about. I'm trying to think. So the one that's really causing an ethical dilemma for us right now is stillborns. Everybody know the definition of a stillborn? I know, this is like great topic of conversation. No? How about somebody Google it?
Isn't it basically a baby that is born, but they're dead in the womb first?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So also called a fetal demise.
At or after 28 weeks of pregnancy.
Yes.
So you still have to carry a term, even if it's dead.
Yep.
Yeah, so the child's not alive, the child dies inside the mother. So there's a lot of children that are, okay, so this is where it's going to get real fuzzy on law and ethics. I'm going to say child, I'm going to say baby. The law does not consider them to be a baby or a child or a person because they weren't born. So in order for them to be considered a person, they have to take a breath. So these stillborns, and also known as a fetal demise, they're not considered a baby. I'm going to say baby. That's my ethics. That's just easier way to call it. But a lot of these babies were exposed to drugs in utero. So our current coroner, at our coroner's office in San Bernardino County, there's a pathologist, which is a doctor, and then there's a coroner investigator who's a cop, who's a sheriff. So you almost never get to talk to the pathologist. They're very busy. But coroner investigator, you can always usually get kind of an update. If you ever work a child death case with CFS, you're going to want to make contact with the coroner about what are the findings of the baby, of whomever, the child. You know, is it a homicide? Was it an accident? Were there any concerns? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So coroner investigator who you're going to talk to, but your pathologist is making your decision on your cause of death. So our pathologist, who I've never met, but for about the last year and a half, is wanting to call and is calling these stillborns that have drug exposure homicides. Will someone Google homicide? I didn't write it down for you guys. This is like towards the end of the lecture. So homicide's a murder, right?
The deliberate and unlawful killing of one person by another, semicolon, murder.
So person. Right?
It says, well, in California, it's unlawful killing of a human being or fetus. With
Okay.
malice.
Ooh, or fetus. Human being or fetus. So this is where, I mean, this is so muddy. So I guess the coroner pathologist person, they just get to call it whatever they want. So for the past, like I said, about year and a half, they've been calling these homicides. So one thing for our data geeks, that's going to make our data in San Bernardino look nuts. It's going to look like child homicides has increased 8 quadrillion %, because all of a sudden, this doctor's calling them something different. The other thing is, and we discuss this every month, they want the DA to file on them. Well, if you can imagine, the DA already has a nice workload. They are not going to file on a stillborn with pause talks. Now, how do I feel about pos tox babies? I absolutely hate them. I don't think it's okay to use drugs in utero. I've removed, it's probably one of the most common removals that I did as a worker. I've seen moms, I think, with up to 12 pos tox babies, and we've removed all of them. I don't think our research is real good on the effects. I think it's still a little thin, but do I know it has effects on our children? Absolutely. So I absolutely don't agree with it, but calling it a homicide, I don't know. So it depends on your ethics. You know, do you consider a fetus a human being? And again, it's what the law says and what ethics says. So it causes this quandary and this fight every month at child death review, because coroner's going to call them what they want. I guess they get to do what they want. DA is not going to file on them. Law enforcement's not investigating them, because there's a ton of babies born drug exposed that live, that we provide services to, or we file on. It just depends on the case. That, let me tell you, law enforcement isn't getting involved. Absolutely not. But when it causes the child inside to pass away, I guess, to me, it shows the pathologist's ethics or point of view by her shift in calling them homicides. So it's really fascinating. Of course, there's also a tie to women's, reproductive rights. Abortion is legal. So if we start prosecuting these homicides, what does that do to women's reproductive rights? It's like this crazy, slippery slope mess that we fight in child death review. But basically, the law is the law. The coroner can call it whatever they want until the law changes. I don't see the DA doing much about them. Yes?
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
So I've heard that this varies, that's I don't know, but is every baby tox free when they're born?
No.
Okay. It's only if it's suspected? Or
you'd probably have to interview a hospital staff, but I would definitely say this is where, what is the word I'm trying to say? Profiling comes into place. That's my opinion. Every baby is not drug screened.
And then if they are tox free and it comes out positive, is it an automatic removal?
Oh no.
Okay.
I have heard in Riverside they love to pull every pos tox baby. Again, I have never worked there. That's just what I have heard.
I've heard different things.
Yeah.
It depends on the county that if it's it's an automatic CFS removal, and then
There
other
should-
places where it's it depends.
There should be nothing that's an automatic removal. Well, except for some torturous, injury. But even then, it takes an investigation. You have to remember all those words I wrote here. You have to do a little investigation. But in our county, no. We do remove a lot of pos tox babies, and now that marijuana is legal, it's I think we're removing less marijuana babies. Also might depend on the social worker, their ethics, how they're interpreting it, but you have to connect it to the impact to the child. I haven't really met a lot of heroin moms that are providing great care to the child. But you still have to detail that out. What's the impact to the child? There's concern about housing, no medical care, no baby supplies, nowhere to go home to. You have to connect it all that. You have to do your due diligence. But I've heard that rumored from Riverside. So I think I can't imagine we wouldn't even have space for every pos tox baby.
Can the doctors clearly show it's the drug use that killed this infant or the fetus?
If you asked me that probably 9 months ago, I would have told you no. But this pathologist is, and I've reviewed hundreds of coroner's reports, and ones that they can clearly connect it, they call it the homicide. and they call it, it's usually methamphetamine toxicity. There's a lot of opiates. I haven't seen any marijuana. But yeah, they are connecting it. But like I said, they almost never used to connect it. So it's really interesting. And I don't know where it's going to go. The pathologist is going to come to next month's child death review, which is like mid-May, which, like I said, I've never met her in the 2 years I've been doing this. So it'll be interesting. We're going to grill her. I'm like, why are you coding them like this? What's changed? What do you want outcomes with this? Because child death review, this panel, it reports to the board of supervisors. So I can't imagine they're going to like a spike in child homicides in San Bernardino County. That doesn't sound good for press. But this coroner is taking it upon themselves to code them like this. But then again, maybe I'm being naive, and maybe this is a major issue. So I did pull the data. You know, there's always data and everything. Now again, you know, data's only as accurate. Excuse me. So I can only give you the data from when I was doing this. So in 2017, I only saw 3 pause talks, baby deaths on the child death review agenda. In 2018, it's 10. And what month is this? April? We're at 10. So maybe it's an increasing problem that I'm minimizing. Maybe they're they're doing autopsies on more. Maybe this is like something that this doctor's really invested and passionate about. You know, I'm not sure. But we're definitely looking at them more, and it's definitely, the number appears to be growing. Maybe the drugs are really bad and they're killing babies. I don't know. I don't know what it is. There's lots of answers. So I don't want it to be like a minimizing it. I just think it's an interesting legal and ethical dilemma about calling them a homicide. It's a fetus. The child's not actually born. It's really just kind of a mess. But an interesting mess. Any questions about that? Thoroughly depressed talking about dead children? No? Any questions?
What would be the alternative to as like referring to them?
They usually used to code it undetermined. So the coroner's codes are usually accident, traffic, natural causes, homicide, undetermined. And normally it was undetermined. Because normally, going back to Michael's question, a doctor wasn't willing to connect the drug use to the death. Anything else on any of this? Anything that I've touched on before we talk about self-care? And let you guys take a break and have some self-care before your next class. No? What do you guys usually do on break? Are you kind of just stuck here? Yeah? Because it's too far to drive anyway? And you don't have a long enough break? Okay. So I get asked, when people are like willing to listen to all the programs that I oversee, you know, they usually like have a sad face. Oh. And ask how I deal with it. I have a pretty good sense of humor. And then, you know, kind of inappropriate sense of humor. I think you have to, because this is actually another 2 meetings a month. So I have at least 3 meetings a month that talks about just children dying or close to death. So, you know, you just kind of laugh when you can, and then building your support network. If you've heard about child and family teams, we talk about support networks for our families. Do the same thing. A cohort like this, I assume you guys already kind of have it built in. That's how it was in both of my master's degrees, kind of built-in friends, even if you just maybe have a couple that you vibe with. That's somebody you can talk to about all this craziness. I mean, just going through grad school is heavy enough. Working out, so many of you guys talked about working out. you know, people will talk about getting county-wide. I started off skinny 15 years ago when I started this job. So take care of yourself. You will absolutely sacrifice your health for some of this crap that you deal with. So get enough sleep, eat right, drink an energy drink, have some cake, exercise. It's all about balance, right? Don't give it all up. Build your support network. Just take care of yourselves because it's heavy. You're going to have heavy days. Hopefully a good support system at home. Getting through grad school is gnarly. So having a spouse, family that helps you get through it is excellent. But I'll tell you, then when you go into your social work job, it doesn't really get any easier. So my husband will tell you, like, I always would tell him it's going to calm down. Oh, it'll be better when I'm out of grad school. Oh, it'll be better when I'm not an intake worker. And then I just kept doing, oh, now I'm going to be a supervisor. Now I'm going to go back to grad school. If you're an intake worker, it's what we do. We're adrenaline junkies. We love all this chaos. So just take care of yourselves. It's hard. Any questions or concerns? I gave you this. This isn't a great. I know it's not very readable, but burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress. I mean, when I was telling you that story about that NoFR client, oh God, I feel the secondary stress coming right on back. But take vacations. Take a vacation after you graduate. Do not go straight into your job. Go take a vacation. I took 2. Take it off. Like, you have to. I've met so many people that finish grad school and then, like, want to start right away. Don't do it. Like, you have your whole life to work and grind. But you're going to get exhausted. I tell social workers to take a vacation quarterly. That means every 3 months. Yes, let's do it. Take a week off. You need the break. You need the break to catch up from work, to get away from everybody, to get your phone to stop ringing. It will take you at least that week to chill out. Honestly, you should probably take 2 weeks because it takes a week. And then now we have a county cell phone. I know most of all of you are young, so you're used to technology. But 10 years ago, we didn't have that leash. So when we left the office, I didn't have to worry about that email. Yeah, but I mean, it was nothing like this cell phone that always has your email on it. It's the first thing I check. Oh, it's awful. So take a break. What else does it talk about? I talked about all these different things. You guys brought up most of these things. Meditate, exercise. This is light exercise 3 days a week. I would grind hard. Laugh, eat well, time off. Green space I thought was interesting. So get some plants. Also, like, has anyone gone to yoga? Okay, so in yoga you learn how to breathe. I would never have told you this 10 years ago. But there's, such thing as a cleansing breath. It kind of sounds like that annoying breath where you breathe in. It's like annoying, right? But it makes you feel better. And going to yoga has really taught me to breathe and like focus on my breath, and it will calm you down. And sometimes that's all you got is that breath, because we didn't talk about any negative self-care. The reality is it's there. Drinking, overeating, drugs, over-the-counter medication. I will tell you, I used to take a lot of Excedrin. I probably have an ulcer. That is not a good coping mechanism. So figuring out how to combat that stuff. But, nobody said any negative ones. I think Michael said eating. Did he say binge eating or something? It's the truth. That's how people get county-wide. We just eat our feelings. And you run out of time because you're so busy. So you didn't pack your lunch. You never cook anymore. You're eating Del Taco, whatever your go-to. Mine's Del Taco. So, just moderate it. Do the best you can. I used to have a friend that would call me stressed. And I would say, you know what? You want me to meet you to go get an ice cream? And we would go, take our 20-minute county break, go get us a little ice cream. maybe not the best coping mechanism, but it helped. You know, it's nice on a hot day. Sometimes you just need that interaction with your friend to go and de-stress, because it's rough. But I'm so happy all of you guys are going to be MSWs. Thank you for having me. Any last questions? You guys will have a little bit of time. Yes?
Have you ever had to set boundaries with any of your agencies?
With agencies, well, I kind of talked about with that service provider. I'm trying to think of any other specific examples. There's, you're going to come into contact with service providers, agencies that are very conservative and that are going to want you to pull kids or do things the way that they want you to do it. You know, they think they know better. Whether it's a hospital social worker or a hospital nurse, people are judgy, you know, and we're judgy. We're social workers. We're paid to judge. But we call them assessment. But you're going to have to set a boundary and frequently of, you know what, I'm going to look into it. And there's a nice way to do it. You know, you don't have to tell them off, like, this is my job, not yours. But basically, that's what you're telling them. You know what, I'm going to look into this, make a determination, I'll get back to you. You can be very professional and still let them know that you know how to do your job. You know, so yeah, it's pretty common. People are going to want to run their agenda. And you're going to see their biases come out, their ethics come out. And that's kind of the most frustrating thing. It's like that story I told you about that diabetic kid. Like, they probably wanted me to remove that kid and put him in foster care. You wouldn't have done well in foster care. I'm sure they would have been monitoring his diet. All right. So, yeah, it gets difficult. But not too bad. Anything else? Okay. Well, I know. Oh, thank you. I'll write my email back up there, and I'll hang out for a few minutes. Also, Nikila works in my office, so you know she could also be a point of contact if you forget how to get in contact with me. But enjoy your break, and thanks for having me. Everything in here is confidential. No.
Oh yeah, always. So Mike always says we have to be a little bit masochistic to do our job, and I'm like, he's only proving me right every week. Oh wait, also, did you stop this yet? Did you want it done?
Oh, no, stop it.